I lived in Japan until March 16, 2011, with my son Ryan and my husband Yuji. The March 11th Tohoku earthquake was the largest that I have ever felt, even though the epicenter was 200 miles away from my home. It shook for 3 minutes. It took my husband and I 7 hours to get my son home from school, and we drove home through a blacked out city with thousands of people walking home on the street. Huge aftershocks continued for months, and Ryan and I were literally seasick when we arrived here in California. Things, as I'm probably sure you've heard in the news, are not good in Japan. The reactor spent fuel pool in Fukushima is still very unstable. There's radiation in the food supply, the water supply, and we just thought we don't want any regrets in the future with our son having his health affected. Sadly though, since the Fukushima Daiichi, that's the name of the nuclear power plant, since the explosion, absolutely nothing in Japan has changed. Radiation is still flowing into the environment, and the people who lost their homes, assets, and jobs still suffer. There have been many suicides, especially among elderly people, and children have been forced to live with radiation, suffering harm to their health. Oops. Okay, there were many people who were exposed to radiation while trying to evacuate in the beginning. Despite a high-tech program called SPEEDY, the government did not inform people about the direction of the radioactive cloud, which is also called the plume. Crucial data collection was circumvented at the beginning, deliberately or out of confusion. For example, technicians were ordered to stop collecting dust samples from March 13th to 18th, and Fukushima Prefecture, strangely, stopped screening people for iodine contamination after just 5 days, so records are incomplete. And you understand that iodine, it decays very quickly, so if you don't find out right away, you've kind of lost your chance. So since it's very hard to know who received how much exposure, the only option right now is to try and screen for after-the-fact health damage. They have tested 133,000 children so far, and 43% of those children already have cysts and tumors in their thyroids. 55% of girls who are more susceptible are showing thyroid damage. There have been 3 confirmed cases of cancer, and just for comparison, after Chernobyl, it took 4 to 5 years for cancer to actually manifest. So Fukushima is looking worse at this point. In Fukushima, only a core 12-mile area, I have a map here, and you can see the red zone here is where the radioactive plume went. Only this sort of middle core area has been closed off as an exclusion zone, which means a no-go zone. The people evacuated from there will never be able to go back to their homes. But actually, to me, perhaps more of a concern is the voluntary evacuation zone, which actually means people don't get any money or any help. It's known as the gray zone, and this is where the government has foolishly optimistic decontamination plans. In big cities such as Fukushima and Koriyama, which are about 35 to 40 miles from Fukushima Daiichi, it's like living in an X-ray room full-time. In Chernobyl, areas above 5 millisieverts per year were actually in the no-go zone. In Fukushima, it's business as usual. Moms, kids, people of all kinds are forced to go about their lives in this environment. The 2 million people living in the gray zone get no governmental assistance except for decontamination, in quotes, of their property. They would have to throw everything away to leave. Decontamination consists of jet spraying roads and rooftops with water, scraping topsoil, and removing vegetation around dwellings. There is nowhere to dispose of this matter. It just gets bagged up in giant plastic bags and stacked along roads and hiking trails, in gardens and farms. A once beautiful area of Japan is like a big trash bag dump. It's horrible. There have been scandals where untrained workers have dumped contaminated debris into streams. Even after so-called decontamination, the radiation levels have not decreased, so children have to pretty much play inside all the time. I have a friend who lives in Fukushima. She writes of her severe depression of having to stay inside all the time with her children. She's complained that her children have begun to get fat because of lack of exercise. Some families have chosen to leave or to split up, sometimes amicably, and unfortunately sometimes not. There's even a new phrase for it, nuclear divorce.
Oh.
One anguished mother at a recent demonstration told of the Sophie's choice type of dilemma she faced when her older high school age son refused to leave Fukushima with her and her younger son. He remains behind, exposed to radiation, without his mother around to monitor where he goes and what he eats, and if he's put his mask on before he's gone outside. The government has only officially evacuated 30,000 children. There are still 352,000 children in Fukushima living with radiation levels that are the same as the no-go zone in Chernobyl. Cathy and I have both worked to gain support for the Fukushima collective evacuation trial, an effort to use the legal system to make the government help the children. Unfortunately, the government is showing no signs of cooperating, and people have to do the best they can with what they're left with. Various volunteer groups are trying to help. Some take children to distant places like Yamagata Prefecture, which is a little bit more up to the north, every single weekend so that kids can spend some time outside playing. My NPO actually works in cooperation with a group that sends children down to Okinawa for summer camp at the beach, and they get to spend 3 weeks there kind of detoxing and playing outdoors and just having a good time. So we'll turn to Cathy now. Thank you.
My story is a little bit, it's actually quite different than Beverly's in that I lived in the southwest of Japan, actually 380 miles south of the reactors. And so it's not so much a story of, although we were monitoring radiation, it's more for me a story of actually suffering with the groupthink, suffering with the party line, etc. After 25 years in Japan, I evacuated my 2 daughters due to the nuclear meltdowns of March 11, 2011. We lived with a Geiger counter. A Geiger counter is a monitor that you use, and you can actually measure the contamination in your food depending on the meter, and you also can measure your indoor ambient environmental radioactivity as well as out in your garden. And that was really, really important to me to at least know these levels if I was going to stay in Japan. We did not evacuate. Our family was staying there for a year because of our distance away from the reactors. So we lived with this Geiger counter for a year, measuring in the kitchen radioactive contamination in our food, making sure that every morsel was at least produced or grown locally, because we were 380 miles away, and before we made the decision to leave. Our city, Wakayama, although we were 380 miles away, we measured locally caught fish to be highly radioactive. Last October, a city councilman's soils test revealed radioactive cesium to be 5 times pre-Fukushima levels at a park near my home. And that to me was quite a wake-up call, because we often talk about evacuation zones and ingestion pathway zones. How far is this contamination going? And many, many countries talk about a 50-mile radius, but I can assure you that there were spikes in our radioactivity in the soil that far away. In May of 2011, after researching ingredients in my daughter's school lunches, I found that only 60% of them were being locally procured. I thought, I am going to find out where all of these companies, where are we sourcing all of the ingredients, and I found that 40% or more were coming from the northeast of Japan, and some actually quite close to Fukushima. The remainder came from outside areas. So I should mention that I had been a teacher at this school for 10 years. I opted out of the school lunch program, but the principal told me not to share my research with the other PTA women or with my Japanese women friends. And for me, it was such a fabulous, it's very rare that they would give a whole English curriculum to a foreign teacher in a public school situation. And I was just thrilled. We had the best loyalty, we had the best relationship. But when my principal told me this, it was sort of like a dagger through the heart. And I thought, wow, his job depends on protecting the Ministry of Education's quote-unquote party line. And that was just that was the beginning of our thinking of actually leaving. As a result, my daughter was told to lie to her classmates that she had food allergies. And my daughter's a trooper. She's now 13 years old and she's settling in fabulously. There are no international schools in our area. She went to public schools the whole time, born and raised in Japan. And we did a little homeschooling, so she has English. So she's settling in fine here, but she would come home every day from school and say, ha ha, I have an allergy to radiation. That's why I can't eat those lunches. So she's great. So thus she brought a homemade lunch every day. In September of last year, to give you an idea of what's going on in the school lunches, in September of last year in Tokyo's Fuchu Union School District, letters went home to parents telling them that radioactive milk from Fukushima would be diluted with other milk that was not as highly radioactive and served to their children at lunch. You might be asking what kind of a society would sacrifice its children like this? Before this disaster, anything measuring over 100 becquerels, it's a measurement that we use typically in food, soil, tangible objects to find the radioactivity. Anything over 100 becquerels of radioactive cesium was labeled, per kilogram, was labeled nuclear waste. Shockingly, last April, the Japanese government, or April before last, the Japanese government told us that the same measurement of contamination in food is safe to eat. So these are obviously very arbitrary levels that they had to deal with. Otherwise, you would have been thinking of literally evacuating half of a country and procuring food from outside of the country, which was not something that was quite a priority, obviously. Many Japanese now know that their government has sold them out in favor of bailing out TEPCO, the owners of the reactors. The government continues to sacrifice children, as Beverly has mentioned, and it is just unconscionable that they are, instead of bailing out their fellow man, the 350,000 students or children that remain in Fukushima, the priority is bailing out the owners of the reactors. Beverly was good enough to explain the thyroid issues. I'm going to go to the next. An issue that I've worked on personally with my NPO in Wakayama. Our NPO is called Nin Niko Niko Niko, and it means it's sort of a euphemism for smiley, smiley, smiley. It's quite strange. But it's smiles abound is sort of the translation. It's very interesting. And we would work to give Fukushima evacuees, because we were so far south, cheap or free housing, as well as plan summer camps for, we did a summer camp last summer for the children to come down with their guardians to get out of that radioactivity for 2 weeks, swim in the ocean, get away from it all. Anyway, for me, the issue that we worked really, really hard on, and that is really close to my heart, is the issue of radioactive burning of this debris which was left over in Fukushima and surrounding areas. And this is resulting from the earthquakes as well as from the tsunami. So you had cars, you had bits of housing, you just had things from factories just floating all over. I'm sure you've all seen the footage. So let's see here. What's happening now is this debris that's become highly radioactive, even in neighboring prefectures of Fukushima. For example, Iwate Prefecture, which is right next to Fukushima. The taxpayers are being forced to pay to ship this debris to areas as far as southern Japan. And it's, as far as 1,500 kilometers to southern Japan to be burned in incinerators suited for regular waste, yet which are ill-equipped to filter out any radioactivity. And this was why we sat around the fire one day and we said, look, I cannot allow my children that would love to bear children, hopefully someday, to be breathing in this, air. And so this was finally the last straw on the camel's back that said, look, I think it's time to get serious. We have to get out. The Japanese government has instituted this policy under the guise of helping the recovery effort in Fukushima. They have invested much money into a media campaign to share the pain, literally. We share because we're all connected, and they've actually, it's a brainwashing campaign, it's very interesting, of those suffering in Fukushima. Sadly, the taxpayers are footing the bill to ship this debris all over to 14 municipalities. Then they pay these incinerators that are usually just burning regular waste, and it's sort of a money-making process, when in fact Fukushima is not gaining anything from such business. So the debris is burned to ash, which is presently being dumped into Tokyo Bay and off of other Japanese coastlines. So this is an issue, as we know, radiation has no border. It affects us all. You can't dump it in the ocean and expect that anyone in their right mind would go fishing there. So these are some of the strange thinkings of the people in higher power. This will continue until spring of 2014. In reality, the only thing that is shared is the radiation, because this policy in no way helps those suffering in Fukushima. While the debris is being burnt, radioactive isotopes escape into the air, are rained down onto the people, their crops, and streams, further contaminating the food supply. Government data reveals that 26 out of 47 prefectures in Japan are measured to have trace amounts of radioactive cesium in their municipal water supplies. Our activist groups in Wakayama work tirelessly to petition city, prefectural, and our local parliamentary representatives against this policy to not accept the debris in Wakayama, and we were successful. So for me, it was just, we had tears when this decision finally came to city council, and then it came to the prefectural council, and we even, my husband was in politics for 10 years, and his senator that he was a secretary for was actually fighting to bring nuclear power into our prefecture, and it turns out that he's supporting us in our efforts to prevent the debris. So that was sort of a fabulous legacy that friends we're very proud of. However, on February 1st of this year, the city of Osaka started burning 36,000 tons of radioactive debris. Osaka is 1 hour away from my home in Wakayama, and home to several Fukushima evacuees. This last Christmas marked our last trip home to visit my husband and my in-laws for possibly many years. It is a bone of contention with my daughters, as they will surely miss their friends, their hometown, and their family. The Fukushima disaster has broken up communities and families, but one of the most difficult aspects of it for me is this thinking, this way of, if we can identify the problem and share, as you women do in this precious group, you can come and join and unite and form as one. This is not happening. Rather, it's being subverted. The process is being subverted. People are not speaking, and there's a lot of stress because women, we're the ones. We get the food. We're the peacemakers. We're the ones that hold this energy in our bodies. So I also noticed that it's the women that are laying down underneath the trucks, trying to blockade these trucks to prevent the debris from coming to their city. A lot of these women are unlawfully detained, arrested. There's just no voice for them. And going home this Christmas, I noticed that even my husband warned me, please don't go out and be too vocal as you have such a big mouth that you will surely be detained. And that made me really sad. There were lots of tears this Christmas before the burning started. So that's the situation as it stands